Hey there, what is up, everybody? I am glad that you are here today. Today, I'm going to help you think about whether or not you're running the right advantages in your Star Wars Legion 2.6 list.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
I got a bad feeling about this.
It's them! Blast them!
Well, hey everybody, unfortunately again, you get me for your Tactics Talk episode today. Colton not only has had a new child, but they've also been overcoming some sickness and stuff, and so we're praying that he's going to get better soon. I know he's already starting to get a little bit better, but I'm just going to help him take one less thing off of his plate. So today we are going to talk about whether or not you're running the right advantages in your list. Now before we dive in, I want to remind you about our Patreon. Our Patreon has exclusive content in there, exclusive vlog battle reports that are only available to Patreons, as well as a monthly live stream show with Colton and I, and there's various different perks at different levels. So take a look at that. There's a link in the description below. Even if you're not a Patreon, we're really glad you're here, and we would appreciate the subscribe if you aren't already a subscriber. Let's dive into our advantages in Legion 2.6. Now, for a while there's lots of different people who talked about these, but today I want to talk about what advantages need to go in your list. Now, there is another video that I will make sure to link below where Colton talked about different kinds of list types and ways to build your list in Star Wars Legion 2.6. And today we'll kind of touch on that, look at those different list types, and talk about what advantages might be best for certain list types. Starting at the top, Advanced Intel. That's a really easy one. Advanced Intel just gives you an additional pass token at the first round. That is so huge. You remember back to the Tactics Talk staging video. Being able to have one additional pass is a very, very strong thing. That needs to be in all of your list builds. Advanced Intel must be in there. Being able to, especially if you're running, if you're a activation from the small act list, from the few act list to the high activation count lists, Advanced Intel is huge. You really want to try and have as many of your units go last as possible. Yeah, that's really all there is to it. That one's great for all of the list types. Moving on to the next one, we're moving to the opposite end of the spectrum, the advantage that I think is the absolute worst in Star Wars Legion. Unfortunately, cover is no longer a guarantee. So fortified positions really is not doing much good. You have the luck, of course. I really think the only benefit to fortified positions would be your aggro lists, and only specifically on a table that have no cover or have very little cover, line of sight blockers. Your barricades are not going to be line of sight blockers. They will grant you heavy cover, but again, cover is not a guarantee. And so you're really going to want to look for line of sight blocking terrain, because not having to roll defense dice is always better than having to roll defense dice. Now with fortified positions, like I said, the only benefit I really see is with those aggro lists, being able to put some heavy cover where you're trying to go with those bodies, like a bunker assault where your path may be really where if you got bunker assault, your path to those POIs would be really telegraphed. So going ahead and putting down some extra heavy cover won't hurt you. You just really want to be looking for line of sight blocking terrain anyways, and I think the rest of the advantages on this list are significantly better, so I don't really know that there's a case to take fortified positions ever. Moving on to the next one, Cunning Deployment allows you to hand out 3 additional dodge tokens. Now, I think that the best list for the best faction for this is actually going to be the Rebels. I really think this is a really strong play on like Rebel troopers, especially if you're equipping them with a shotgun, because they're going to be able to stack up dodges so quickly. This is also a really good one to include when you're running commanders with Exemplar, being able to put a dodge on a commander that has Exemplar will be able to get that token shared to whoever you need it to go to. It's also a strong one for the clones, because the clones are able to share their tokens now at range 2, and being able to put out some extra dodge tokens without having to take any actions to do so can be very strong, especially turn 1 when you're trying to prevent that. I think when you use Cunning deployment, that's really vital that you use it on your units that you get out earlier. If you put the dodges on units that come out at the end, you're most likely not going to need them unless your opponent just really out activates you at activation count wise. However, I think it's really important that you get those on those units that are gonna have to go out early, but that you really want to mitigate the damage that goes to. Again, I think this is a really strong one on your aggro list, putting the dodge tokens on your aggressive units that are just going to have to go first for whatever reason that may be. The next one is Garrison. Now, Garrison allows you to give 1 core unit prepared positions. Now, there's been very strong feelings on whether or not prepared positions is good. I've thought of a few units where I think that prepared positions is actually really good. The first one is B2s, especially now with the addition of Aqua Droids. Being able to prepare positions, your B2s, and place them fairly far forward is normally a dangerous thing, because you don't want to put them far enough out where your opponent could bring in like a sleeper cell and be able to move in and get close enough to pull off a shot on those V2s. However, now with Aqua Droids, you can just infiltrate the Aqua Droids with your first activation and then move them in front of your B2s to create a wall. Now you have your B2s very far forward, you have a wall in front of them. A lot of the time people are opening with like a 3-pip like Assault or Roger with droids, so it's not too hard to get an order onto those B2s, and you may be able to time it to where they are able to move onto the table and shoot very quickly afterwards. You could even do something like Grievous's 2-pip, where you move Grievous onto the table towards the end of the round, and then those B2s take a wound to move past the Aqua Droids, and then they're able to take another move and shoot, or an aim and shoot, depending on what your opponent did. I really think that could be really strong on a B2 unit, especially a super B2 unit. That would be really strong. You could also do that with for like a Riot Stormtrooper squad if you're trying to make those work. I think that you could have a few plays with all of them, and even if if you're running a list that doesn't have a line of sight blocker that you can move out immediately, I really think that you could put the prepared position on a unit and just barely put it past like a scout move. You don't have to fall into the trap of prepared positioning as far forward as physically possible. Just putting it somewhere safe behind a line of sight blocker that gets them just a little bit further than a scout move is really beneficial to getting your units out on the table and where they need to be. The next one is Ordnance. Now, this one is actually one of my favorite ones to include. I don't really build a ton of anti-armor into my lists all the time, and Ordnance is kind of like a part of my dealing with armor plan, if you will. Being able to potentially if you rolled 3 crits, you put 6 wounds on armor, that's really strong. Or just being able to put some other wounds onto something, they're just automatic damage. That's really strong, especially if you're coming up against slower armored vehicles, like an AAT or a snail tank or something like that. I mean, I understand those are fast somewhat if you double moved, but if your opponent's double moving with a heavy in order to escape your ordnance, I think that's a win as well, even if you're not able to pull off an ordnance attack. Just by the fact that your opponent passed up an attack, that's a really strong play. The other thing that is really handy for Ordnance, which is going to lead into our strafing run conversation, is making sure is the fact that it also puts out suppression to trooper units at range 1. For every hit or crit rolled, it puts out 1 suppression token. Now, the use of Ordnance, we talked about that. That's really obvious. Put damage on armor, or make armor move from where it's just sitting and shooting. I think that you could also use Ordnance if you run into a list that doesn't have armor. You could use Ordnance in the same way that we're going to talk about using Strafing Run. Now, Strafing Run, I believe, has some really high swing potential for scoring victory points in your matches. Now, typically in Legion 2.6, you will find that your opponent has a unit that's controlling a safe point. Oftentimes they'll leave a longer range unit controlling a further back point from your army, and they often just leave one unit there, and maybe a commander is kind of at range of that unit. Strafing Run and Ordnance could be placed to put suppression onto that unit that you normally would not be able to because they're outside of your range. Now, I think it's because you place the token for that at the very beginning of the round, it's a very telegraphed play. So when you do Ordnance to put suppression or Strafing Run, it's vital that round you have a plan to deal with their commander. Whether that plan is to keep them out of range for the courage range of that unit, or to eliminate that commander, you have to make sure that you do that in the round that you play that card. Because most core units are going to be the units that are back capping objectives like that. Core units are most likely the ones to be back capping those. Most of the time, those core units' courage is only 1. So if you are able to put 2 suppression through Ordnance or through Strafing Run on that unit, that will prevent that unit from scoring that back point. Again, it's vital that you make sure that you have a plan for the commander in order to take it out. I like to include this I'm including Strafing Run probably 9 times, Ordnance probably on 70% of my lists, especially those that don't have a way to deal with armor. Now, if I do have a way to deal with armor in my lists, that's when I'm switching Ordnance out for Strafing Run, and then that becomes my deal with the back capped point. So that's really, really vital. So I hope that you have learned something from our conversation about advantages. Advantages can be really strong if you place them in your lists correctly. I think it's important that we approach the conversation of advantages in our list from the perspective of what does my list struggle to do, and how can this advantage help me do that thing. So if you find yourself with a list with not much range, I think Ordnance and Strafing Run are very helpful for that. If you find yourself with an aggressive list that needs some extra padding on the way in, I think Cunning Deployment is a very good option there. And obviously Advanced Intel, that's the one that you want to try and get almost every time. So when you're thinking about what advantages to include in your list, always come at it from the perspective of what advantage is going to help my list do the thing that it struggles to do the most. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.